Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stephen Howard, the Director of Policy and Outreach at the American Task Force on Lebanon, and I'll be moderating today's event. In this webinar, we're going to discuss ATFL's policy paper, which just debuted today, titled How to Prevent Lebanon from Experiencing a Lost Generation. We have a great lineup of speakers featuring opening remarks from Ambassador Ed Gabriel, the president of ATFL, and a panel of experts featuring Marissa Khorma, director of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center, Nadim Kyriakos Saad, a board member of NAFTA, and Father Yusuf Nasser, general secretary of Catholic schools in Lebanon. The format for today's event will be as follows. We'll have Ambassador Gabriel offer special opening remarks. We'll then transition over to our panel discussion. We'll then pivot over to the audience Q&A, and that will wrap us up at around 1:15 Eastern Time. I want to remind everyone of the Q&A feature and the comment feature. Please send your questions in as they come to mind throughout the event. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Ambassador Ed Gabriel for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to welcome to the ATFL webinar everyone that's on the webinar series today. And it's the title is How to Prevent Lebanon from Experiencing the Lost Generation Regarding the Education Sector. Let me first acknowledge our distinguished moderator and panelists. Stephen Howard will moderate as mentioned, and our panelists include Marissa Khorma, Director of the Middle East Program at the Wilson Center, Nadim Kyriakos Saad, member of the board of NAFTA, and of course, Father Yusuf Nasser, General Secretary of Catholic schools in Lebanon. Even before COVID, there were indicators of concern that the education sector was struggling. Lebanese students were already underperforming on international tests, and there was also a surge in teacher absenteeism in the public schools as well. Today, the education sector is at the risk now of collapsing. COVID and the economic crisis have resulted in years of a learning loss. And today, 1 million children are deprived of a quality education. A recent study by the Center for Lebanese Studies found that 73% of the teachers are leaving the education sector, and 3 of 4 of them are thinking of leaving Lebanon altogether. So at the top of it, to top everything off right now, Lebanon is faced with the threat of another war, Israel-Hamas war, which is spreading to Lebanon, unfortunately. And we have to ask ourselves some questions, how will this affect quality education? Will students have to go back to virtual learning? How will this work with electricity and the internet? I fear that if Lebanon and the international community does not take action now, Lebanon does risk losing an entire generation of young people. This paper does reflect the consensus of educational leaders in Lebanon and internationally. And one recommendation I do want to call your attention to is the need for an unconventional donors conference that includes both governments and non-traditional members of civil society, NGOs, and of course, UN agencies. This should be considered our #1 priority right now. So in conclusion, let me thank you all for joining us. I encourage you to read the policy paper on our website. And Stephen, I turn it back to you now to moderate the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gabriel, for setting the stage. First, I'd like to turn it over to Marissa. And Marissa, I wanted to ask you, what are the challenges facing the Lebanese government when it comes to education?
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thanks also to Ambassador Gabriel and to ATFL for shedding light on this very important topic. This was a major concern For me, during my last visit to Lebanon, the despair that I heard from so many people, not only in the education sector, but in various other sectors, including the civil society sector as well. Going back to your question, I think it's critical to address the current situation. And we've already seen one comment in the chat about how the war in Gaza is also impacting Lebanon. We know that there have been clashes between Hezbollah and IDF in the south of Lebanon, and various reports have emerged about over 10 to 15, maybe even 20,000 people fleeing many of the towns and villages in the south. And with that internal displacement, you are talking about families, as well as particularly children who will not have access to education. This creates a sense of insecurity for a country that has gone through so many different crises, a plethora of crises over the last few years only, compounded by decades of poor governance, corruption, and of course, a civil war lasting more than 30 years. So the challenges that Lebanon and the Lebanese government face today, of course, is very much impacts the education sector, starting, of course, with the economic and financial crisis that reached its peak with the, sort of progressive devaluation of the Lebanese lira, how this impacts teachers' salaries, which, for public school teachers in particular, those salaries are modest to begin with. And then if you add that, that additional component of the devaluation, then these families, these individuals, and the families that are dependent on them basically do not have any purchasing power for just the basic necessities. Ambassador Gabriel mentioned the electricity challenge, which is very much a result of financial mismanagement, poor governance, corruption, and the list goes on. And without electricity, many of these schools are not going to be able to function. And so that adds another layer for government institutions, for the Ministry of Education, but also for the public schools, as well as the private schools. And it was critical for, as you did do in the policy paper, to zoom into both the public school system, but also the private school system, given that Lebanon has always been known for a very strong private school system. The other component is, and of course, this ties back into the financial and economic crisis and its impact on Lebanese society and the government in particular, is of course the price of fuel. And this is, I've heard this from so many people in Lebanon, that the price of fuel is so high that families are thinking twice about driving their kids to school. And how they're going to offset all of these different, all of these different necessities for their children. And so there's tremendous pressure on the Lebanese family, tremendous pressure on children who should be able to access schools, should be able to have access to quality education. And I think at this point, we can discuss the quality component a little bit later because it's been addressed in your paper and it is critical. But right now, we're talking about a crisis of just making sure that kids are going to school. And that is the fear moving forward, the fear of a lost generation that you so rightfully emphasized, and Ambassador Gabriel also at the top.
Thank you very much, Marissa. I'd like to turn it over to Nadim now. So Marissa hit on challenges facing the Lebanese government. Nadim, I wanted to turn it over to you for challenges facing the international community.
Thank you, Stephen. And again, thanks to the ATFL and to Ambassador Gabriel for the invitation and also for the policy paper, which is a very encouraging step forward. Contains a lot of very promising proposals, so I would encourage everyone to read it. So I just perhaps a disclaimer. Of course, I'm an international civil servant in addition to being a member of NAFTA, working for the International Monetary Fund, but I'm here participating in this webinar in my personal capacity, and none of the views that I'm going to express represent those of the institution, its board, or its management. So because this is about education, I thought I would start by remembering the words that Nadia Twaini, a Lebanese poet, wrote some more than 40 years ago. She said, I belong to a country that commits suicide every day while it is being assassinated. As a matter of fact, I belong to a country that died several times. So I didn't want to depress everyone with this, but I mean, it is, I think, a perfect expression of the sort of conundrum in which Lebanon finds itself. It speaks to, 40 years later, the misery in which the country finds itself, but it does contain also perhaps a glitter of hope, in the sense that if you died several times, there is always the possibility that you will be reborn. And so that's what I was thinking about as I was considering the title of your webinar and the fear for the lost generation. We are at a stage where I'm fearing beyond the generation to a fearing of a lost country itself. So hopefully our worst sort of thoughts will not materialize, and Lebanon will come back again from the brink. But right now the situation is not reassuring at all. Marissa did mention the current situation, as did Ambassador Gabriel. So I would just perhaps give you a little update on the situation, on this conflict that we are currently going through. Another example that we live in an uncertain and shock-prone world. Doesn't help with the global economic outlook, which was already weak and with slow and uneven growth. Of course, the countries that are involved directly at the center of the crisis, countries and territory, will be the hardest hit. But as far as Lebanon is concerned, in addition to the fears that it might be sort of engaged in the conflict as well, at the very least, we are seeing already from where I sit some spillover effects, including travel cancellations, large decline in hotel occupancy, some internal displacement. These have been the most immediate economic impact of the conflict, shrinking the economic lifeline, which is normally provided by tourism. Another fact, so tourism, of course, is in decline in the entire region, certainly even more so in Lebanon. And that was one, perhaps, of the only sort of sectors that were showing some dynamism in the recent time. So far, the financial market in the region have reacted in an orderly way. But again, as far as Lebanon is concerned, the borrowing costs for Lebanon have risen markedly. So we were talking about the challenges of the international community. And of course, the first one that comes to mind for me is the sort of difficult engagement that Lebanon has been having with the international community, and in particular with the International Monetary Fund. As we know, there was discussions. There are discussions that are ongoing. I mean, there was a staff level agreement that was reached But since then, Lebanon continues to face an unprecedented sovereign banking currency crisis, which has been going on for more than 3 years. And we all know the numbers. The contraction of economy by about 40%, the Lebanese lira, which has lost 98% of its value, and so on and so forth. Inflation, triple digit, central bank having lost 2/3 of its foreign exchange reserves, etc., etc., etc. I mean, I will not add to that. I mean, what worries me in particular is that sort of incapacity that we are witnessing of a country incapable of seizing back its destiny. I mean, it's of a government, caretaker government, which is not able to make good on the commitments that would allow it to enter into an agreement with the fund and to start benefiting from some financial assistance, which would then signal to the rest of the international community that this government means business, and that there is still a possibility of having some hope in the Lebanese economy and in Lebanon more broadly. And to say the truth, I don't know what can be done. I mean, there was an article that was published recently in the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs, and I would recommend everyone to read it. It's entitled "The Endgame to Lebanon's Woes, IMF Reform and Political Willingness" by Leila Dagher and Sumru Al-Turk, who are two academics based in Lebanon. And it paints a very depressing but which seems a very accurate picture of the situation in Lebanon between illusory reforms and waiting games and essentially a political class that is unwilling, incapable, condemned not to engage in any reform for a number of reasons that are written in the article. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, is a challenge that we are facing today as an international community. What do you do to save Lebanon? What do you do to save the education sector in particular? Who do you talk to? Who are your interlocutors? What are the levers of action for the international community worried about the fate of the educational sector in Lebanon? And so maybe that requires us to come up with some new ideas. I have to say, Stephen, and bravos to kudos to you and to the ATFL and the authors of the policy paper, because it does contain a number of innovative ideas, which hopefully, I mean, perhaps with others, and we can talk about it more at length, will help sort of kickstart that rescue operation of the educational sector in Lebanon. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Nadim. I'd like to turn it over to Father Nasser now. And Father, I wanted to ask if you could, in your opening remarks, touch on just the role of private schools in Lebanon in general.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you share my... Yes. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Task Force for Lebanon and all the participants. I will speak about the situation in Lebanon, the actually situation in Lebanon. Can we go to the next? Yes. Since 2019, Lebanon has passed through a succession of crises. In 2019, we began with the protest movement that led to a subsequent period of instability in the country. And after that, we have the the explosion of the shores of Beirut, which was a catastrophic tragedy on the country. And after that, we lived. The banks faced bankruptcy, leading to the loss of deposits. And after that, we have the COVID-19 epidemic disrupted learning and causing significant losses in the field. And after that, we had the depreciation of the Lebanese pound that reduced the value of salaries to a point of insignificance. Currently, there is a current state of insecurity in the south of Lebanon, with fears of a potential escalation in the situation. That means that Lebanon passed through all this type of crisis, and this crisis lead us to our actual situation. At the beginning of this year, to 2023-24, the public and the private education sector resumed operations as usual. And the feedback was positive and optimistic. We had an optimistic expectation which prevailed. The public sector depended on the state-provided incentive in dollars, while the private sector relied on the support fund in dollars, primarily financed by parents and partially by certain NGOs. That means that in the public sector, the state finance the incentive to the public teachers, and in the private sector, we set up this support fund in dollars, which is financed by parents and partially by certain NGOs. Next, please. What are the major challenges faced in public schools? The state's capability to guarantee the incentive. We need 5,000 billion Lebanese pounds every 3 months. This capability needs assurance throughout the entire academic year. It's important to note that the public sector has experienced a loss of more than 25% of its students due to a lack of trust in the states, stemming from a 3-month strike in the previous year. We lived the last year a big strike in public sector, and actually parents lose the confidence, trust in the state, and because of that, they transfer their children to the private sector. And in 2019, the student population in public schools was approximately 365,000. However, by 2023, this number has declined to less than 150,000 students. That means that the public sector lose a lot of students, and these students came to the private sector, and the responsibility become bigger on the shoulder of the private sector. Next, please. Okay, the major challenges in private schools. On the other hand, private schools must provide incentives to teachers in dollars to secure their commitment. Teachers cannot work in private sector without incentives in dollars. and the private schools should find alternative sources of income to close the gap between teacher salaries, operational costs, and what is feasible for parents. There is a gap between what is due to the school and what parents are capable of paying to schools. It's important to note that the need for aids has tripled this year. Despite these financial challenges, the conservation of educational quality remains the main priority for private schools in Lebanon. It's our big concern to give to our students a good quality of education. But how to do that in the current situation with all these challenges? Next, please. Last year, the dollar incentive for teachers varied from $100 to $300, while parental contributions ranged between $200 and $500. This year, the incentive ranges from $300 to $1,000, and parental contributions vary between $300 and $2,000. This indicates that the requirement for subsidies valued last year at $20 million, and it is currently at least $40 million. $40 million, which is need to cover this gap and to stand beside our parents that they can send their children to our private school. Next, please. Regarding the subsidies, it's important to note that all subsidies are maintaining the same value as the previous year without any increase. This suggests that regular donors are becoming hesitant to enhance their contributions. Donors are seeking information about the local contribution and are questioning the actions that our state is taking to address the crisis. Regrettably, our state is totally absent in addressing these concerns. We feel that we are alone to address this problem. The state is totally absent, and we should rely on ourselves to find solution to the private educational sector. Next, please. The ongoing war in Gaza and the exchange of fire at the southern border of Lebanon have had a detrimental impact in education. Specifically, 9 out of 40 Catholic schools in the region remain closed since October 7th. The majority of parents have left the area, resulting in students relying only on online teaching. However, the sustainability of this situation is a growing concern. There are challenges in ensuring the payment of salaries in Lebanese pounds and incentives in dollars to teachers, while it is the right of teachers to receive their due compensation. The source of these funds remains uncertain. Additionally, nationwide, parents are reluctant to pay tuition fees due to widespread fear of a potential escalation in the war. The prevailing sentiment is that priorities now lie in addressing immediate needs such as food and health. This is about situation at the border, the south border of Lebanon. We have there 9 schools closed. Despite the situation, the schools are still teaching their students online. But the big problem is how to assure the incentive and salaries for these teachers in these schools. It's a big problem for us, and we are seeking now, we are searching ways to assure salaries and incentives in dollars for our teachers. It's their right to have that because they have to live in dignity, and it is our responsibility to find ways to assure them that. Next, please. The needs. How can we provide assistance to public employees and individuals with limited financial means? How to provide aid and help to stand beside our families, and especially the poor families and the public employees. The second question, how do we ensure the operational costs? You spoke about electricity and a lot of other things that the school need to resume and to continue its mission. How can we guarantee salaries for teachers in the 9 Catholic schools at the southern border? And the last question, how can we regain the confidence of the Lebanese people and encourage them to contribute to schools? Because the situation of insecurity put the parents and the families in the situation of insecurity. Because of that, they are not able to go to school and to pay it's due to them. It is the impact of this situation on all the Lebanese family all over the Lebanon. And this is what I thank you. What I prepared to explain and to show you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father, for your work and the work of so many of these institutions. I want to remind everyone now we're almost getting ready for the audience Q&A, but I do have some follow-up questions for our panelists. But for people in the audience, I know we have a lot of people here who care about education in Lebanon. For example, I received an email from Sharbel Taher in the nonprofit organization Teach for Lebanon here in the US. I know there are so many people on the call who do good work in this field already. Please take advantage of the Q&A because we want to make sure that we get as many good questions as we can for the conversation. So now in terms of follow-up questions, I wanted to start with Marissa. In your recent article with the Wilson Center, you discussed, you had a good deal of analysis on support that the U.S. is providing to the Lebanese armed forces. In particular, you talked about livelihood support, subsidies in U.S. dollars for soldiers to account for the depreciation of the lira. And a lot of people have asked the question, can this type of a model be replicated to support teachers and their families? And so I wanted to ask for your opinion on that question.
This is a really good question. First of all, this is the first time that the United States has taken a step like this, basically injecting cash in order to pay salaries, given that the Lebanese armed forces continue to receive support from the United States and other Western allies and remain to be critical for Lebanon's security upholding its sovereignty and, of course, its territorial integrity, given the multi-layered complexities that Lebanon also faces when it comes to the political challenges that were described earlier. I think that it would be great for this to be replicated, but I don't think it is an easy path to take, because it requires a lot of back and forth, making the case. It requires really to answer the question in very bold terms. Why is this urgent, and why Lebanon? For a U.S. administration and Congress that is currently looking at the map in the Middle East and seeing, currently, of course, the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, but even before October 7th, so many other problems and challenges with 3 active conflicts in Syria, Libya, and in Yemen. And so it's really about how to prioritize this discussion, how to make it urgent, and how to answer the question, why should Lebanon's education sector receive the same kind of support? Now, this cash injection does not have to come from the United States. It also can be basically brought together or collected from various donors. Going back to one of the recommendations of the paper that Ambassador Gabriel mentioned at the top, this donor conference that's focused on this particular challenge in the education sector. So this can be an interim solution, but of course it requires a lot of coordination, and beyond the pledges, if pledges do come in, it does require follow-up and ensuring that this is actually implemented. So it's not panacea for the challenges that the Lebanese education sector faces. However, it can inject some much needed oxygen into the sector, given the plethora of challenges it faces from financial aid that is required for the teachers, for the students themselves, for their families, but also financial aid required to address the infrastructure, to address the technology, all of these different items that are critical to the functioning of just basic education services. There are other solutions that you discuss in your paper about how to get the diaspora to be more involved. Those are ultimately sort of short-term solutions that can be deployed, and they're important because they do bring different state and non-state actors together in supporting and sort of reviving or resuscitating the sector. But it's certainly not the way moving forward. We know what the way moving forward looks like. It's very much tied to the political and economic future of the country and what the government has to do to first end the political deadlock and move forward with the necessary reforms. And that requires pressure that should be exerted on those who are at the top, the political elite that hold many of the keys to many of these reforms that have to take place. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Marissa. That was extremely thoughtful. I wanted to turn it over to Nadim now. And Nadim, my question for you is, how can international donors, especially the United States, ensure that assistance is just most effectively targeted so that it reaches those who are most vulnerable?
Thanks, Stephen, for the question. And that sort of, I talked a little bit earlier about the macro sort of challenges, but your question now brings me back to perhaps the micro challenges and what can be done to overcome them. Because I'm convinced that considering the difficulty of the situation in which Lebanon finds itself, considering the intractable nature of the crisis in which it is, I think we need to start thinking creatively about how to come up with solutions in this particular context. So for example, most international agencies are mandated to work through the government. What do you do in a situation like the one Lebanon is going through right now? even when international agencies decide to bypass, let's say, the official actors, they are left with the dilemma of finding credible and well-governed channels for getting funding to school. It can be done through NGOs, of course, but which NGOs, right? How to ensure that we are targeting the schools who need it most, the NGOs who are the best at doing this. How we ensure that we are responding to school needs versus simply pushing, the NGO programs on schools. USAID is present in Lebanon. It's a huge program. Of course, it comes with a huge overhead because traditionally USAID has contracted its sizable programs through a handful of USAID contract with organizations that know how to work the system. Of course, so a sizable portion of the aid package goes to salaries of non-Lebanese staff who have to learn about the country, the context, the intricacies of operating in Lebanon. Of course, they have Lebanese partners, so that helps, but it just adds to the overhead. And we are not in a situation right now where we can afford to ask for these multi-million dollar packages because the money is just not. I mean, the money might be out there, but it's a trust and the confidence in Lebanon being able to deal with this aid responsibly that is not there. So quickly on what can be done, right? I think the paper, as other panelists have mentioned, contains a lot of very helpful ideas. I mentioned it earlier, the topping up the school teacher salaries, the solar power installations. At the same time, I mean, we have to be careful not to be seen as, sort of making charitable donations to school. I mean, I think what we are looking for and is more sort of how can we empower, right? How can we ensure ownership of the school leadership and the community in which they find themselves? How do we give them a voice? How do we help them organize themselves in networks, etc.? I mean, there are networks in Lebanon, right? Father Nasser leads a well-established network of Catholic schools that are organized along religious lines, even though they serve multi-confessional communities. And it's a traditional model that has worked well. We are thinking of another model as well, which is a school networks, self-governed by school principals, by design created to be cross-sectarian and cross-geographic and crossing even the public-private debate divide, bringing public school, private school, and semi-public private schools. And international organizations should invest, and the international community should invest in strengthening these types of networks because they are a way of kickstarting a model of reform in a completely paralyzed state and decaying and corrupted state. Give back the power to the principal to take ownership of their destiny, rely on the Lebanese individuality, but also their sense of solidarity, and help them help each other come out of the situation in which we find ourselves. And so these networks we see can offer a solution to the challenges that I mentioned. And I want to emphasize that this is not a hypothetical idea. There is a network, the network I belong to, NAFDA, which I'm happy to talk more about in the questions and answers, that's doing exactly that. And I want to emphasize that it's doing it with relatively modest amounts of contribution. So these are not costly projects, and so far they are generating incredible impact and results.
Thank you very much for that, Nadim. Let me turn it over to Father Nasser now. And Nadim kind of alluded to this, but one of the big challenges is for many schools is just the cost of electricity. In the paper, you had pointed out that for some schools it can cost up to 40% of their budget. So how can solar energy be part of the solution here? Oh, Father, kindly unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen. First of all, I have to mention the high price of fuel. And I think that Melissa mentioned that too. The fuel has a big and high price in Lebanon. And secondly, I should mention the high cost of public electricity in Lebanon. Because of that, I think we should find another solution to provide electricity to our schools. Because of that, we are going to the panel solars actually. And we are seeking how to install in each school in Lebanon, Catholic or not Catholic, private or public, we should install in each school a panel solar, because our experience learns us that with the panel solar, we can economize, and we can this 40% we can minimum and shrink them, and we can reduce the cost of the electricity in each school. And doing that, I think that we can first of all reduce the tuition fees on parents, and we can help the poor families, and we can help the public employees that they can be able to send their children in our schools. I think that it's the best way to economize and to reduce the cost of the electricity in our schools. And there is a study done by Euromena in Lebanon, and this study gave us this result. With the panel solar, we can surely economize our budget, and we can reduce the cost of the electricity, and we can help more our families. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Father. And now we're going to transition over to the audience Q&A, and we have a number of really good questions. I think the one question that is on everyone's mind, and I want to ask everybody to contribute here, is what impact could the spread of the Israel-Hamas war into Lebanon have on education? And also, how can schools and families prepare for this scenario? Father Nasser, I wanted to turn to you first.
Thank you. First, we are learning now from our experience with these 9 schools closed right now since the 7th of October. These schools, despite the fact that they are closed, they continue to teach their students using the online way. And all our students are learning now through the online teaching. And I think it's the best way in case of the escalation of the situation. And here in the secretary, the general secretary, we thought about that with all the principals of schools. what should we do in case of escalation? What is the best way to continue our mission in this bad or dire situation? I think that the first response was we have to assess and evaluate the potential situation. And secondly, we have to be prepared to go online teaching to continue our mission towards our students. And the bad result of this situation of insecurity at the border, at the south border of Lebanon, is that parents actually are not able, don't want to pay to schools because they have another priority, and which that will create for us a big problem, big financial problem, how to assure salaries and incentives to more than 20,000 teachers in our Catholic schools. And we have around 100,000 teachers in Lebanon at all. It will create for us a big problem how to assure salaries and incentives in dollars in case of the escalation of the situation.
Thank you, Father. And I'd like to turn over to Nadim with the same question.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I did point to some of the impact that the current crisis is having in Lebanon, the spillover effect. Of course, if Lebanon were to become more involved in the current conflict, I mean, that would be a disaster, adding a crisis on top of a crisis on top of another crisis. And so I hope this will not happen. I mean, so far, this network of schools that I was talking to you about, and that under the umbrella of NAFTA, I mean, there are some 60 schools, right? I mean, in the only 2 of these schools are in the south and not in the deep south. So far, they have not been affected by what is going on. So that's a good news. The other thing that I wanted to share is that is also very characteristic of the NAFTA sort of mindset, is that the schools in the network throughout Lebanon have been in touch with each other during this time of crisis and trying to support each other through this chain of solidarity, with an additional sort of ingredient which has been bringing in psychologists and bringing in, specialists, mental health specialists, to help the teachers and the students deal with the mental sort of stress and the trauma that is coming out of the development in the region since the 7th of October. So these are some of the elements, and I think, I mean, these are these old values of solidarity, of coming together, that are so important in the Lebanese mentality, are again at play here, and I think we should, build on them and continue to rely on them.
Thank you, Nadim. And now I'll turn it over to Marissa for her reaction.
Thank you, Stephen. I think in terms of the impact, this has been touched upon earlier, and particularly by Father Nasr, with regards to the schools that have been shut down, how it's impacting communities and those thousands who have also fled up north. Of course, as this war intensifies further, and if Hezbollah also intensifies basically it's the clashes with IDF, we're going to see more adverse impacts on all of these communities. And when communities and families are being targeted, then of course children, teachers, families, all of these are being affected as well. I want to go back and just highlight the point that Nadeem made with regards to already existing networks and how these networks are activated during times of crisis, and how they can provide some respite, basically, with all this uncertainty. Because I think, the mental load of the uncertain path of, what's going to happen in the next few weeks, few months with this current war in Gaza is also what's adding so much more stress. It's what, going back to what Father Youssef mentioned, it's impacting parents' decisions to pay tuition because they don't know if they should be holding on to this cash for their own basic needs if things take a turn to the worse, or they should maintain this in order to invest in their children's future. But that's where, again, I want to go back to the importance of the role of the diaspora. And I've seen some comments here from a few people with ideas about injecting AI technology, for example, and how the diaspora can help train teachers, help improve the teachers' qualifications, and maybe have some ideas for more online programming. Of course, that experiment was not necessarily the best experiment, the online education and turning to virtual classrooms during COVID, but I'm sure there are lessons learned. And the majority of the Lebanese people remain to be very, very educated, very talented, and are scattered all around the diaspora in many different sectors. And that's why some sort of streamlining of these exchanges of knowledge, not just financial support, but just knowledge exchanges, are also very, very important. Whether this happens from a community in North America to a village, or whether it happens from a more sort of organized, larger umbrella or setting, I think at this point is irrelevant, because there's an urgent need that needs to be addressed. But in the meantime, on a parallel track, we have to be thinking about how all of this moves forward with regards to the reforms needed to just unlock some of these impasses politically that impact the sector.
Thank you very much, Marissa. That was very comprehensive. I wanted to turn it over to Father Nasser. There was a question in the chat from Sharbel Taher about, and this is beyond just private schools. This is really, we're talking about just education across the country. What can be done to improve the quality of teaching in Lebanon? Oh, friendly reminder to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think that this is the essential question: how to improve the quality of education in Lebanon. It's a big concern for all of us, because I think that after 5 years of crisis, and we passed through at least 2 years of online teaching, all that is impacting, is affecting the quality of education. What to do? I think first of all, we need a situation of security, and secondly, we need not to think always about financial question, because right now this aspect is taking a lot of our time. at the place of thinking about the quality of education, the principals are thinking how to assure money to assure the salaries and the incentives of dollars. This question, the financial question, is taking a lot of our time, of our concentration. We need a situation of stability in Lebanon, and this condition is urgent to be able to work on the quality of education. I think that we have here in Lebanon good teachers, a good quality of teaching, but we need security, we need stability, we need someone who can provide us with what is needed to concentrate on our work, on our education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. And I wanted to turn it over to Nadim now. And Nadia Abu Rizk Assad from the Renee Mawad Foundation has a question. She talks a bit about a program they're sort of piloting called, quote, Helping Your Village. In our policy paper, we have a similar sort of recommendation. We call it Adopt a Village. I wanted just to ask, what models you think are the best in terms of diaspora engagement.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I saw that it's in the paper. I mean, and so the idea of adopting, sure, I mean, is a good idea, I think, in the sense of getting that sort of direct relationship, right? I mean, that's what we are talking about when I'm thinking of, how do we kickstart again a system that has stalled or is in danger of stalling without going through the institutional setting and the governmental setting, which is collapsed. Maybe that concept of adoption is one that is worth exploring. I mean, in the context of NAFTA, again, I mean, there is a concept of adoption with a concept of brotherhood and sisterhood, with all the schools coming together like a great family of teaching and solidarity. So these are all possibilities. I mean, I saw somewhere else in the chat there is this concern about, how do you get around the governance issue? How do you get around the red tape and all of that stuff? Maybe that's the beginning of an answer. You go directly to the actors, the people on the ground, the educators, the principals, the students, and the communities, and you work with them. And that's what it takes. If that's what adoption is about, so yeah, let's go for adoption. Let's give it a try. Thank you,
Nadim. Marissa, I wanted to ask a question from Osama Abu Nasser. It's a very frank question, but it's the $1 million question we always have to ask is, why should the international community care about the internet, about the educational system in Lebanon?
I mean, we are in such a dire situation in the region where a lot of these organizations, international organizations, are having to almost prioritize the crises that they have to respond to. Because, you have immediate humanitarian crises that have to be tended to, and you have lingering conflicts that basically have worsened, and then donor fatigue, which you also address very accurately in your paper. The case for supporting Lebanon's education sector has to be linked to Lebanon's to hold the whole project, really, of rebuilding Lebanon's sovereignty and the state itself. It has to be linked to that. You will get measures here and there, projects, initiatives by different donors that whose governments maintain good relationships with the Lebanese government, or that have a stake in Lebanon's stability and security, to perhaps invest more. But I think that that's a case that has to be constantly made and linked to how critical it is to address these multi-layered crises that Lebanon is undergoing. And it does start from the top. It's about exerting pressure where needed with the political elite, with the political actors who continuously stall all of these different processes from taking place. Now, I've written this to, in the article that you referenced earlier, and my sense in Lebanon was, talking to many of the political leaders, the political elite. There was this sense of sort of euphoria that, no matter what happens, we remain to be a very resilient population, a very resilient people. The Lebanese have love for their country. They come back with cash injections, with fresh dollar injections, and then of course there's remittances. And so there was this boasting going around that yes, we have our crises, but look how much money we were able to bring in, over $8 billion, or I think at the time it was $6 billion during a crisis. This is not going to be the case in 10, 15 years from now, because the brain drain that we're seeing today is a brain drain of talented, educated people with skills that can compete in world markets. If the education system remains in the current state, moving backwards rather than forwards, then we're going to see a lost generation that will not be able to even leave or migrate and compete. And so that is the warning sign that has to be emphasized, not only to political actors inside, but also to the international community. And of course, it will have to be tied to just the way that the international community views not only Lebanon, but the region's stability and security.
Thank you, Marissa. I have three more questions. I have one for each of you, but we are running a little short on time, so I'm just going to ask that for these answers, if you could keep them to about a minute each, just so we can get to as many questions as possible. First, for Father Nasser, how can we ensure local leaders have a voice and impact when establishing a national vision for education? Remember to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I think that that our actual leaders actually can't do anything because the situation is bigger than them. But I think that we should sit down together, and they have to think together about solution. The unity of the leaders, the Lebanese leaders, could be a key of solution for the future of the country, and especially for the future of the education. Each one alone can't do nothing,
Right.
but together, the unity to what we call the common responsibility. It's a key. It's a big key of solution for a better future for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. And for Nadim, we had an interesting question about how education leaders can engage parents and local communities to support learning.
Well, that's exactly what's happening in the NAFTA network. I mean, I don't want to make it all about NAFTA, but the experience is so compelling. I mean, I've talked to some of the principals all over Lebanon, and the experiences that they're having in the most remote parts of Lebanon, you would be amazed to see how these principles are connecting with their communities, because that's where they come from. They come from these communities, and the communities are extremely supportive in the dire circumstances in which they are, to make sure that these children do not go to waste, that there is no lost generation. And so they are just, part of that village that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and they're all helping each other. And it's amazing the sort of ownership that you find when you have a community-driven process, when you have the principles that are empowered in leading those schools, where it's not just an idea, it's happening on the ground, and it's amazing.
Right.
It's one of the few reasons for optimism for me right now in Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Nadim, and thank you for the work of NAFTA. Last question is for Marissa, and one of our members of ATFL, Roy Edson, had a comment in the chat about refugees, and one of our paper's recommendations is to balance support between refugees and Lebanese students. My question is, what can be done to achieve this?
I think this requires constant discussions and clear messaging from the Lebanese government, from the education sector, to the different international organizations that are providing assistance for refugee education or just refugees in general. There was a challenge very similar to what Lebanon is going through in Jordan. And so the government compact in Jordan that's focused on the Syrian refugee crisis ensured that the host communities that are impacted by the refugee crisis have also should also benefit. And so a formula that is similar to this should be emphasized in many of the programs and initiatives that are being rolled out. And as long as these conversations happen before these programs are designed, then you can ensure that you're helping the Syrian refugee children, ensuring that they have access to education, but you are also not leaving behind the Lebanese children who also are impacted by the different crises that their country is facing. So that's one way to do it. This, in the absence of the government's leadership, to actually drive that point home, that's where the onus lies on the education sector and the educators to say, well, we would love to have more support for Syrian refugee children, as long as this is matched also to those who are in need from the Lebanese side.
Thank you, Marissa. Well, we've now reached the conclusion of our webinar, and before we wrap up officially, I did want to give each of our panelists just 60 seconds each if they wanted to add any final thoughts. So I'll turn to you first, Father Nasser, just for a quick 60-second concluding statement.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this panel. It was very important to show everyone in the world what is happening in Lebanon and what is the need, our need in Lebanon, and how can we save and rescue the situation, the education in Lebanon. I think that we need a vision for the future of Lebanon. How can all of us could be together to find a solution for a better future of Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. I'll turn it over to Nadim now.
Thank you, Stephen. And I would again, of course, thank you, the ATFL ambassador at Gabriel, and for all that you are doing. I mean, I think to finish on a positive, optimistic note, I want to see an opportunity in this crisis. an opportunity to rebuild the sector on more solid ground, raising a next generation of citizens who hold shared values and who are learning to be successful in this century and beyond, building useful skills like collaboration and communication and critical thinking, looking at school principals that I was talking about a little bit earlier, who are in the most dire of situation and are still showing up to school, and not only showing up, but showing leadership, embracing these kind of initiatives, and making sure that they take our children to the next level of excellence. You asked a little bit earlier, Stephen, why, the sort of fatigue about why should we save Lebanon, and who cares, perhaps, not that you said that, but the sort of underlying, who cares about Lebanon, right? So again, Lebanon is unique, and the Lebanese people are unique. And I started today my remarks with mentioning Nadia Twaini. I want to finish with Nadia Twaini. She was talking about Beirut, but I think it applied to Lebanon at large. And she said, in the Orient, it is the last sanctuary where man, and we could add woman, can always don the color of light. I think that's what we need to preserve. And that's the sort of unique character of Lebanon in its diversity and its unity. And to be able to maintain that and to grow it even further, even in the very difficult circumstances we are going through, must be our challenges for the period to come.
Thank you, Nadim. Marissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Also echoing gratitude for you and Ambassador Gabriel and ATFL for highlighting this important issue. I think it's always timely to talk about the impact of, various crises on education, because this is what touches the very basic needs of the people. It's our human capital in the region that will have the potential to make the change that is needed. We've seen, I think, a lot of youth take to the streets in 2019, and also Lebanese communities, young people, the elderly, families, friends come together after the Beirut blast. The diaspora also showing solidarity, but also financial and other types of support. And that is, going back to Nadim's point, that is what also gives me hope. These silver linings, these slithers of hope should not be underestimated, particularly in giving voice to young people who are still trying different things. And those are the initiatives that have to be supported. So thank you again for highlighting these issues.
Thank you very much, Marissa. I really wanted just to thank each and every one of you, Marissa, Nadim, Father Nasser, and Ambassador Gabriel for his opening comments. This was a great webinar. I think we all learned a lot today. I want to encourage everyone in the audience and watching to read the policy paper, which is on our website and on our social media. It featured contributions from a large group of experts in Lebanon and the international community, and we want to echo our thanks to them once more. And lastly, I just want to encourage everyone to follow ATFL online and on social media to stay up to date. Thank you.